tutorial is just to explain a little bit more about logic and logic used by Descartes. So I'm going to describe this as ways of knowing. Using inductive logic, we apply observations to the unknown. Then we come to know things. We observe, oh, that's how we come to know things. Using deductive logic, we can make necessary conclusions given what's already known. And I'll go through how that works. Using abductive reasoning, we seek the simplest and most likely conclusion from our existing observations. And then using divine revelation, we accept that some things can only be known because they're revealed to us by some God or some heavenly being, something like this. We are too limited to infer these things without some divine aid. And academics try to avoid any claims about divine revelation. I would say Descartes tried to avoid them too. He didn't mention them, certainly, but I think they're still there. Okay, let's go through each one. Inductive reasoning. As I've already said, you're observing things, you're drawing conclusions from your observations. The sensations are inducing ideas. That's why I'm saying it's inductive. Sciences utilize induction, and there are probable conclusions that you can draw from induction. For deductive reasoning, sometimes the deductive inferences, are kind of like, they kind of lead people to say like, no shit, like, no shit, Sherlock, like, great, you found that out. Okay, so suppose you know that Julia has 5 apples. By logical deduction, you can infer she has 4 apples. Someone's like, oh, Julia has 5 apples. You're like, well, she must have 4 then. Well, obviously, no shit, like, it's pretty obvious. Suppose you know Joel just ran 24 kilometers over 2 mountain ranges. By logical deduction, you can infer his feet must hurt. Pretty obvious. Suppose your friend was at the mall food court at noon, and you were at the mall beside the food court. By logical deduction, you can infer, oh my God, we were right beside each other. That's pretty obvious, but it is a logical deduction. Math uses deduction. We already know 2 plus x equals 5, therefore we can deduce that x equals 3. These math proofs are deductive inferences. They deduct new knowledge from what is already known. We already know this. We deduct some new knowledge, let's say. So, and I would say only use the word proof when you're referring to inductive inferences, because sometimes students are using proof when it's not deductive, and it's not really a proof, because proof means that you're sure of it, and that's why proof should be just for like math and other deductive inferences. Let's look at an example that I've already looked at before. I have 5 apples, therefore I have 2 apples. The conclusion does not include any new information. Conclusions contained within the premise. These deductions start with one big claim and then infer implied facts or necessary facts. And the deductive inference deducts from all of these facts. Okay, so all these implications. So here's a box of necessary implications with this premise. 5 apples. Okay, box of necessary implications. There's 1 apple, or there's 2 apples, or there's 3 apples, or there's 4 apples. So we wouldn't say 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. I mean, you could say if you have 5, you have 1 plus 4, or 2 plus 3. 2 plus 3 equals 5. So you have 2 plus 3, and then you have the same thing as 5. You could say that, but box of necessary implications, there's a bunch of implications within this box that you can fill out. You can say 2 plus 3. You can say 1. 1 is implication. If you have 5, you have 1. And you just keep filling out all these implications. And now you can say, therefore, I have 2. Or you can say, therefore, I have 1. Or you could say, therefore, I have 2 plus 3 apples. There's all kinds of implications that you could have. Let's look at a different example. Muta is a cat. From the cat returns. What are the box of necessary implications? Cat, okay, then it's a mammal. That's a necessary implication. If it's a cat, evolved to eat, I mean, unless it's a stuffed animal or a cartoon cat, but you know what I mean. If it's a real cat, it's a mammal. Evolved to eat meat, domesticated differently than dogs. Those are all necessary implications. So you can fill out those, and then you can say, therefore, Muta is a mammal. Now you've deducted these other implications and just come up with 1. It's a mammal. All right. This may have confused some people. This is generally how deductive reasoning is explained. It's explained using syllogisms and Venn diagrams. You can see this if you've done a LSAT test or tests like this. These kind of tests, we'll explain it using syllogism and Venn diagrams. Here's a way of saying that all cats are mammals. Muta is a cat, therefore Muta is a mammal. And then if you look at the Venn diagram, you could say mammals is this big group that includes camels and horses and all kinds of things. Cats is a group within the mammal group, and Muta is within the cat group. Therefore, Muta, who's a cat, is a mammal. Okay, you can look at it that way too. So you could look at a lot of different syllogisms, a lot of different Venn diagrams using this box of necessary implications. Muta is a mammal. Muta evolved to eat meat. Muta domesticated differently than dogs. All those things are implied. Okay, here's Descartes' argument. Descartes thinks, therefore Descartes exists. So he's thinking of some necessary implications of thinking. Existence is a necessary implication of thinking. If you're thinking, you're existing. Having self-awareness is a necessary implication. Neurons are firing, we would say now. Therefore, I exist. You deduct and you say I exist. If you want to look at it with a Venn diagram, all thinking things know themselves alone must exist when they are thinking. Descartes, I Descartes am thinking, therefore I Descartes know myself alone exist. Existing things is a big category. Thinking things is within that. Possibly non-thinking things could also be within the existing things. Okay, let's look at abductive reasoning. We use abduction pretty much every day. First, we gather an idea about an effect, usually by observation or induction. Next, we infer the simplest explanation or cause. It's basically educated guessing. Deduction by comparison begins with a cause and infers effects. You fart a lot. Abductive inference, you might use whey protein. Deductive analog, you use whey protein, you fart more than average, is maybe it's not a necessary implication. So maybe that's not the strongest deductive reasoning, but it is deductive reasoning. Yeah, okay. You are more fit or ripped than average. Abduction, you probably work out. So cause and effect, and or rather effect and then cause. You are more fit or ripped. That's an effect. What would be the cause? You probably work out. Putting the cause first as a deduction, you work out every day, therefore you're more ripped than average. You don't hate animals. Abduction, you probably have a pet. Deductive analog, you train dogs, you don't hate animals. Okay. We don't really need to use this ever in the course, but it is just a type of reasoning, a way of knowing that I thought I would include. Possibly not necessarily a way of knowing per se, because you're not going to know that things, know that this follows directly. It's just, it's a weaker inference than produce. It wouldn't necessarily produce knowledge per se. Okay, but anyways, divine revelation, we could know things because God or some kind of divine being revealed them, supposedly. That's a possibility. How does Descartes use this? Well, to wrap our heads around this, we could say Descartes' Gardner reveals we have a perfectly equipped toolbox. So Descartes' like, ooh, perfectly equipped. What would that necessarily infer? That there's a hammer. A perfectly equipped toolbox would have a hammer. So in the same way, if God is revealing, I created you, I'm perfectly good, his God reveals that, perfectly good God would not deceive, create an immortal soul, be like this kind of watchmaker, and would give us natural inclinations. That one's sleeping. Okay. Meditation 6. Let's look at his ideas. He establishes a premise about God. I said in the last tutorial that he established it based on revelation, but there are some other ways. Descartes established his premise using a mix of induction. His premise that God exists as this supremely perfect being. He used a mix of induction, divine revelation, and deduction. Induction, divine revelation, deduction, like Sherlock Holmes. Inductive logic, when using that, Descartes lived during a time when induction was prized. Galileo was like at the same time of Descartes. He was making these astronomical discoveries with his telescope. That was amazing. And that was inductive reasoning that he was using. His observations, so Descartes' observations would not have been needed even if he, Descartes' observations would have been needed even if he did not mention them to confirm in part that God exists and what God's nature is. He doesn't mention that he observed the earth and then the earth reveals kind of that God should be this certain way. But that's kind of implied always that you'd have to look at the world and see what it's like. If God created it, then you have to look at it. You can't just not look at it, not observe it. So there is some inductive inferences going on. And then in the text, inductive inferences get Descartes started on his inquiry into the existence of material bodies. Okay, deductive logic proving the existence of God. Descartes has an ontological argument for the existence of God. Descartes does not hold, so this is from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Descartes does not hold that God's existence is immediately self-evident, but it can become self-evident to some careful and industrious meditators. So the self-evidence is meaning that it's necessarily implied. So that's basically deductive logic. God's existence is so obvious that the human mind can know nothing more evident and certain, he says. God's existence can be deduced, whatever. So again, from the Stanford Encyclopedia, a different article on ontology, Descartes' ontology. Whatever I perceive clearly and distinctly is guaranteed true because I am the creature of an all-perfect God. Again, these are all like necessary implications, and that's using deductive logic. Divine revelation, though, I'm still saying that Descartes, he maybe hit it or he undermined it in some way, that he relied on revelation to say that God exists as a supremely perfect being. But I think he needed that. He needed that. He needed the Catholic tradition or the Bible to say this. We know that he would have learned a lot about Catholic tradition and the Bible in the Jesuit school where he was educated at La Flèche. Okay. Once Descartes had his premise about God, his premise that God is this perfect, supremely perfect being. So once that's established, he made inferences about how that supremely perfect God would set up the created world. Deducting from his premise. Premise, we have this perfectly equipped toolbox. Implications, here are the tools that are implied, necessarily implied, if you have a perfectly equipped one. So therefore we have a hammer. Got to have a hammer if it's perfectly equipped. Deductive reasoning explained using a Venn diagram. All perfectly equipped toolboxes contain hammers. Things that contain hammers could be other things other than perfectly equipped toolbox, but perfectly equipped toolbox is within that larger category. Descartes' toolbox is within that. So Descartes' toolbox is perfectly equipped, therefore Descartes' toolbox contains the hammer. Okay, his whole aim in the meditation is to populate the box of implications that are derivable from the premise that God is this perfectly good creator. Meditation 6, he's attempting to fill this bodies exist box with implications. Meditation 2, he was attempting to fill the minds exist box with implications. So this perfectly good creator would make souls immortal. If he's perfectly good, he's not going to make you die after you die. You know what I mean? And if he's going to do that, minds have to exist because they're just immaterial things that go beyond, that rise up to heaven or whatever. That's Descartes' thinking, anyways. God is perfectly good creator, so therefore he makes minds a distinct substance. So mind must exist, therefore. And then in meditation 6, Descartes is going with God is perfectly good creator, therefore he needs us inclined to believe in him. That needs to be in our nature. God does not deceive. If he's perfectly good, he's not going to be a deceiver. If he's not a deceiver, then bodies exist. Because if bodies didn't exist, then he was just making, if they were illusions, he would be deceiving us. So the bodies must exist. And he wants to enjoy his handiwork. To enjoy his handiwork, his things that he creates have to be real, not illusions. So bodies have to exist on that premise. And then what he does is he deducts all of these other implications and just ends up with one. And he goes through one by one. What are the implications that God is a perfectly good creator? So deductive first premise, having established that supremely good God exists, using combination of revelation, induction, deduction, Descartes fills in the implications, as he said, to argue that objects exist. Okay, boom. So now here's again his arguments that I went through in the last tutorial. But paragraph 10, he's saying God is not a deceiver. Objects must exist because to say otherwise would be to suggest that God is a deceiver. God is not a deceiver. So is that a revelation? I don't know. It's based on a bunch of things I should have said in the last tutorial. That's based on revelation. It's based on a little bit of induction. It's based on a little bit of deduction, or even maybe intuition you could throw in there. Okay. And then the deduction is material objects exist because God wouldn't purposely deceive his created beings by creating fake objects or illusions. So here's the logic, what it looks like. God exists as a supremely good or supremely perfect creator. And there's all the implications. If you deduct, you get to does not deceive. God does not deceive. You can look at it as a Venn diagram also, not deceivers. There could be other things other than perfectly good gods, but perfectly good gods is in there, and Descartes' God is in that. So all perfectly good creator gods do not deceive the beings that they create. Descartes' God is perfectly good creator God, therefore Descartes' God is not a deceiver. Another argument, God has given me a strong inclination to believe that those ideas arise from corporeal objects, like real, tangible corporeal objects. So the implied deduction is corporeal objects exist because a good creator God wouldn't give us a strong inclination to believe in corporeal objects. Okay. And again, he does the same type of logic where he deducts one of these, he deducts the rest, and he leaves us with one implication, necessary implication. Bodies exist because God needs us inclined to believe. You can use a Venn diagram to explain that one too if you want to look at that. The human body, like a clock, is formed by its creator for the sake of emotions, which it usually manifests. So there, implied is that material things exist because God wants to enjoy seeing them work, and they can't be just illusions. So again, you can look at the deduction from these necessary implications that God is perfectly good creator. And you can look at the Venn diagram if you like. So that's everything. I just wanted to clarify that. Hopefully that helps you guys out.